Welcome to day 121 on the trail. We have three readings for today from John 7, verses 10 through 31, Numbers 30, verses 1 through 16, and 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verses 27 through 37. We continue our story in John's Gospel today in verse 10 of chapter 7. Now, earlier in this same chapter, Jesus had told his brothers that he did not intend to go to Judea for the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, due to the danger presented by the Jewish authorities. Also, recall that in verse 6, Jesus told them that his time had not yet come. As we have seen repeatedly throughout John's Gospel, Jesus waits for direction from God. In fact, Jesus' attentiveness to the will, direction, and timing of his Father is a major theme that weaves its way through the theological tapestry of the entire Gospel. Then, in verse 10, we learn that Jesus eventually decides to attend the festival. Verse 10 says this, "But after his brothers had gone to the festival, then he also went, not publicly, but as it were, in secret." We are not told why Jesus decides to travel to Judea. However, his intentions were most certainly to keep a low profile. Earlier, we learned that his brothers wanted him to perform miracles publicly to encourage his disciples in Judea and those visiting Jerusalem for the festival. Instead, Jesus journeys quietly to the city, without drawing attention to himself upon his arrival. We also learn from John that the possibility of Jesus coming to Jerusalem for the festival had indeed caused turmoil among the people of Jerusalem. Some were sympathetic to Jesus, believing that he is a good man. Others, however, thought that Jesus was leading the people astray. Now, while this accusation might not seem very serious today, this second charge was no small matter according to Jewish law. According to Deuteronomy 13, false prophets who used deception to lead people away from God were to be executed. Although Jesus entered Jerusalem secretly, in the middle of the festival he goes to the temple, the very center of Jewish religious life, and there he begins to teach. When the people heard him, they were astonished and impressed by his teaching. Typically, Jewish teachers or scribes would demonstrate their authority as scholars or teachers by referencing respective rabbinic authorities, or through their association to an esteemed master. Therefore, a rabbi's authority and influence was determined by his academic pedigree. Jesus, however, is not associated with any given rabbinic school or tradition. Instead, Jesus once again tells those gathered that his authority comes directly from his Father. Beginning now in verse 16. Then Jesus answered them, "My teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. Anyone who resolves to do the will of God will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own. Those who speak on their own seek their own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and there is nothing false in him." Jesus does not just claim that his authority to teach comes from God. Instead, he tells those gathered that the truthfulness of what he teaches can be proved in the lives of those who dedicate themselves to doing God's will. Since what Jesus teaches comes directly from God, the very one who gave them the Torah and also created the world they are living in, then, when they truly and honestly seek to align their lives with the will of God, then they will also discover the truth of Jesus' teaching. For Jesus, his teaching is not to bring glory and honor to himself, as was the case with many rabbis at the time. Instead, he was solely interested in leading people back to God. Jesus then directly addresses the death threats that have been made against him for his supposed violation of the Sabbath when he healed a man who was lame for 38 years in John chapter 5. Here, Jesus is not subtle or maintaining a low profile. Beginning in verse 19, Jesus says, "Did not Moses give you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me?" The crowd answered, "You have a demon. Who is trying to kill you?" Jesus answered them, "I performed one work, and all of you are astonished. Moses gave you circumcision. It is, of course, not from Moses, but from the patriarchs. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment." Jesus responds to his detractors on two fronts. First, he points to their own hypocrisy. They claim to honor the law that they received from Moses, but they fail to actually follow it. We will find a similar but harsher statement on the hypocrisy of the Jewish religious leadership in Matthew chapter 23. Second, Jesus addresses the reason behind the healing on the Sabbath and its relationship to how they interpret the law. To do this, Jesus draws a comparison between the one person he healed on the Sabbath and the ongoing Jewish practice of circumcision. Since circumcision was required on the 8th day of life, if that day fell on the Sabbath, then the work of circumcising the child would have to be performed on the Sabbath. The Jewish rabbinic tradition was well aware of this conflict between these two laws. In fact, in the Mishnah, Shabbat 19 verse 2, it reads, "One can do anything that is necessary for circumcision on the Sabbath." Also, we find in the Babylonian Talmud, "See how beloved in the sight of God is the command of circumcision, for it supersedes the Sabbath." Therefore, according to the traditional interpretation of the law, circumcision took precedence over laws regarding the Sabbath. However, rather than arguing about the interpretation of the law, Jesus turns his attention to the ones for whom the law was given. Jesus points out that if circumcision, which is performed on a single part of a person, is allowed on the Sabbath, how much more important would it be to heal a person's entire body? And this was not a new understanding among rabbinic teachers. Around AD 100, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah wrote, "If circumcision, which affects one of man's 248 members, supersedes the Sabbath, how much more must his whole body, if his life is in danger of death, supersede the Sabbath?" Jesus demonstrates the importance of life itself, and not just avoidance of death. Jesus came to bring life, healing, and restoration for God's people. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.